You are listening to the Stand Out Now podcast with your host, Dave Mendonca. Check out each episode as top experts share their proven marketing, publicity, and sales tips to help you cut through the advertising noise so you can reach your ideal clients, get noticed, and connect with powerful influencers. The Stand Out Now podcast is brought to you by podcastinterviewexperts.com, helping entrepreneurs attract clients through business podcast guest appearances.
How's it going, everybody? Thank you for listening. My guest today is the creative director and founder of a digital publishing agency called the Red Cup Agency, where they produce podcasts, ebooks, and articles for their business clients. He has over 20 years of journalism experience, including time spent as a Good Morning America writer, a Dateline NBC producer, and producer for many other TV networks as well. He was once a writer for the 1980s hit cartoon ThunderCats, which I watched a few times as a kid. Lee Schneider, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. My pleasure. Now, Lee, let's dive right into your past. I love doing this with my guests. As a kid, and also later on as a teenager, what kind of marketing or sales or persuasive strategies did you knowingly or unknowingly use to get what you wanted?
Well, this might be the opposite answer from the one you might be expecting. But as a teenager, I was a hippie kid. So I hated capitalism, and I hated commerce, and I hated marketing. I stayed as far as possible away from all of that. And I believed unrealistically maybe that, merit would drive everything. The best people would get noticed. In my case, I was interested in being a writer, and the best writers would be noticed automatically, or they wouldn't have to do any marketing at all. That was my logic at the time.
So how does one come to that logic back in the day? Like, you're a hippie kid. I guess you're just against the establishment. And what were some things that triggered this?
Well, I think, the politics of the time, Nixon was president, the Vietnam War was going on, and, it was a divisive kind of time for kids. And we were very much encouraged in our peer groups to choose a side. You were either a jock, or you were a hippie kid, or you were an intellectual, or you were an intellectual jock, or an intellectual hippie kid, or a science nerd. Our school even had a wall to sit on by the parking lot, and you sort of chose your part of the wall to sit on depending on what group you were in. So I think dividing things up like that definitely drove our formation of the world. Later in high school, I taught a class myself with a friend of mine about sociology, and it was all the kind of socialist sociologists. That's what we were into. So it's an early formative way of thinking that's kind of outside the box and not doing the norm and all of that kind of thing.
Okay, so tell me this then. Tell me, as a hippie kid, how did you get into the media? Because your career is quite extensive in the industry. How do you make that leap?
Well, that's an interesting question. I always was interested in writing and storytelling. When I went to college for a few years at Antioch College, they had a work-study program. And the work-study program was, to me, far more interesting than the writing classes or the music classes I was taking. And I had two work studies. One was in a mental hospital, literally. And so I was working with Elvis Presley and Jesus Christ and a number of other famous people, or people who said that they were. And the other internship I had was at a newspaper in Texas. That just got me, this kind of idea of showing up at a crime scene or anything with a notepad and just saying, okay, I'm from the newspaper, what happened? And that kind of storytelling power and that narrative stuff. Really, I got hooked into that early on. So I was always writing stories, writing plays, writing little movies, making little recordings. I had a little tape recorder. I would always make commercials and recordings, so that kind of storytelling mindset was really early on. So the media stuff came, when I started to get into it professionally. I was living in New York writing plays and getting them produced and directing plays. And of course, there's no money in that. I loved it, but we had a baby on the way and I had to start figuring stuff out. So I tried out to write for the soap operas at the time and washed out of that program. And I tried to write I auditioned at like news stations. If you're from New York, WINS, how fast can you write a news story? They didn't like me. Later, I learned how to do it. But then eventually, my dad helped me. He said, I know a guy who knows a guy, and you could get a job writing a cartoon called ThunderCats. And, I had no idea. I mean, there are a lot of old boys clubs at the networks, and it's really hard to break in. You're writing samples in that era meant a lot. Remember, there's no social media. You have a resume on paper, and you have a script to hand someone, or if you were lucky, a show. So much of it was who you know. And I was lucky enough that my dad knew a guy who knew a guy. And I went in to see Peter Lawrence, who for ThunderCats fans is a well-known name. He was the showrunner. And he took a chance on me. I was a playwright at the time, and took a chance to say, well, I guess this guy can figure out how to write a cartoon. So, some of it is presenting myself well and articulately. And some of it is, he didn't have any, he could look at a play. That didn't tell him anything about my ability to write cartoons.
Right. So you're talking about your dad. How did your dad get these contacts? What is his background?
Well, that's interesting. After the World War II, there was something called the GI Bill, and he got a scholarship, and he got into Harvard Law School. And he decided when he graduated to go to work for this crazy new industry called television at the time, like 1954 or so. And he started writing contracts for people. He wrote the contract for Captain Kangaroo, if anyone remembers that crazy old show, and all these, old-timey TV shows, and he worked his way up in ABC. First he was at CBS, then ABC. He was at ABC for decades and decades, and, met a lot of people and knew a lot of people. That certainly helped me. I came with baggage because if I came in the door, some people liked him and some people hated him. He was a very strong personality. So sometimes I was working at a deficit without knowing it. They were really angry at him, so they were yelling at me. And other times they liked him and they were nice to me. But on and on, it just comes down to what I wrote. In those days, you were very much judged like basketball players. Can you sink the hoop? Can you do it? Can you make the play? Can you write the script? That's all they really cared about. They didn't care about what school you went to, at least out here in California, or what your background was. It was, can you do this? Can you write the script? Later when I went into a news organization here, it was a CBS affiliate called KCAL. I had movie scripts, and I said, I can write a TV news show. And they said, really? You've never written one. I said, well, give me a try. So another guy named Larry Perrette gave me a try, from nothing. And I could do it. And I turned out to be pretty good at it. So a lot of it is pure performance-based. I mean, a lot of stuff, a dad or a friend will get you in the door. But in my world, in the writing, producing world, it's very much performance-based. People wash out really fast or become stars really fast.
Right. And that's still prevalent to this day. Do you know if it's still?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, we can learn more about people before they walk in the door by checking on social media and, looking if they have a blog, or there's a lot more information about people that's discoverable. But when you're doing agency work like I do, or production work like I did, you really have to be careful who you hire. And those people are usually, the people I hire are usually journalists or production people because they can just deliver. You ask them to do something and it's done. Or if they can't do it, they come to you right away and they say, here's my problem, let's fix it. It's a different mindset than I don't know what to do. This is going to be an hour late, a week late, a month late. I don't know what to say. You don't have that.
Well, they're professional.
Yeah, right.
I get it.
Yeah.
For sure. So you're talking about, okay, I'm not going to make this whole podcast about the ThunderCats, but I just want to let you know, Lee, being a young Gen Xer, and there's other millennials as well, saw the show, and obviously it was quite popular. So what is it like for you to know that there's people like me who appreciated the cartoon as a child, and to know that you were part of that?
It's fun. It's great. I always say that my ex-mother-in-law, my ex-wife's mother, one Thanksgiving dinner, she said, I think you're always going to be known for this thing, ThunderCats. And I said, no way, come on. But of course, she turned out to be right. And it's fun. I look back fondly on those shows. I learned a lot about writing. and writing cartoons and storyline on those shows. I recently started watching a few of them again with my youngest son who's 6. And it's kind of cool to, like, my name comes up on the screen. He says, "That's Daddy." All right, that's Daddy. We watch through them, the action of them, or some of them still, I like the story construction. I can still appreciate them. The animation looks super primitive, compared to what's available now. But the animators were so good then. That's another thing that all the writers and producers on that show, we talk about two things. The voiceover actors who are Earl Hammond and people like that, Broadway level voiceover actors, but also the level of detail you need in the writing. I would write an amazing scene that took place in outer space with rockets and all kinds of crazy stuff, and the animators would fax back from Korea or Japan, and they'd say, "The main character, what color are his shoes?" And it would just blow me away because they had to figure that out. They were thinking at a level of what was the belt buckle like? And we had to answer a lot of questions. It really got me into this mind of detail, which is good to this day in writing and, producing and making scenes.
So I'm noticing this trend, Lee, with your career. It's all about storytelling, the narratives that you paint. And I'm just curious, what's the difference? There's a huge difference, actually, between writing a cartoon and being a part of these news shows like Good Morning America and whatnot. It's a totally different kind of thinking.
Right, definitely. Yeah, as a freelancer, when I started, I was a freelancer, which basically means I took on anything. And I did a lot of stuff. Just some of it was figuring out what they needed and writing. This is a very specific writing thing, but writing in the voice of the client or writing in the voice of the newscaster. That was the commonality. If I had to write a cartoon character, like one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you would watch those cartoons and really listen to the way they spoke and try to capture their cadence and the way a cartoon turtle talked. If I were writing a news intro for, Stone Phillips or Maria Shriver or any other NBC correspondent or ABC people, you listen to the way they talk and you try to write the story as though they wrote it in their words. And a lot of those people would rewrite heavily. You'd hand them a script. They'd go, "Nope, that doesn't sound like me. Let's fix it." And the nicer ones would show you how to fix it. And you would almost co-write the script or the story. So much of it is listening at first, getting the character. And it's the same with clients now. If I'm doing a podcast for somebody, I have to figure out not only what they want, but what is their capital V voice like? How do they want to express themselves in the marketplace? And how can I serve that? How can I do that? I just did earlier this year a podcast for Nike and with their talent and their guests. And the Nike way is very specific. You have to think like Nike thinks and hit the points that they want to hit. It's fascinating, and then there'll be another client where I'll have that problem to solve in a completely different way.
Well, they have their target audience in mind, pretty much. So that's why they have a certain way of communication. That's why, you have to learn that. Yeah.
Right. But also they sound like Nike, and Adidas sounds like Adidas and Apple sounds like Apple. It's one of the things of brands. It's kind of a visceral thing where a Mercedes feels and sounds and looks like a Mercedes, and a BMW feels and sounds and looks like that. And the language used to talk about those cars are an easy example because they're so specific. The way you talk about a VW and a Tesla is way different than the way you talk about a Beamer. And if I were working for those companies, I'd really have to think about what do they sound like? Literally, what words they use, what pictures would be in a Beamer ad versus, something, say, for Uber. So right. That's kind of a fascinating. I view it as a fascinating problem to solve with each client.
Okay, keeping that in mind, how do you make yourself attractive? Like Red Cup Agency, how do you make your agency attractive to these brands, especially early on when you were just coming? Yeah, out of nowhere.
Well, it's changed a way lot. When I started, which is Red Cup started in 2011. Not many people with my background in production were working in the online space. There were a bunch, but not that many. I was kind of a novelty And I worked hard to find a niche. And my niche back then was people might have an idea for media, but they didn't know what to do with it. Maybe they had a blog or they didn't have a blog, or maybe they didn't know about social media. And I tended to connect the dots. I would say, well, let's get you started on a blog and I'll show you how to post it to social media. And let's get you started on, podcasting wasn't even big then, but, let's get you started on maybe a video or two, and I'll show you how to connect those to your blog or to your book. In other words, taking intellectual property and dispersing it, but also making it connected in a community. And that mindset of connecting it in a community, that served me to this day. That part of it has lived on through all the iterations as I keep changing and evolving the company.
That was the sales pitch? Like, did you call up people and say, hey, this is what I can do for you? Like, how did that marketing work?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I did call a few people, but I did speaking gigs a lot. The initial way I marketed was I would go to the Chamber of Commerce, or I would find, the co-working spaces were just coming in. But I got a lot of my first gigs, like I would give a talk about how to use LinkedIn at the local Chamber of Commerce, a live talk. And that netted me a bunch of clients who then became referral people. They started talking about me. And I became the guy who knew this stuff, who could talk to normal people about it. Because at the time, it sounds crazy to say, but people were actually building websites using HTML, and WordPress was relatively new. It was all, Twitter, I joined Twitter in 2009. So that means when I started Red Cup, my Twitter account was just a year old. So this was all pretty new to people. But I would say what really helped me was public speaking and networking events, like joining the local Chamber of Commerce, going to some mixers and events and talking about this, and people finding it interesting because very few people were doing it at the time.
Right. What about today? Is it mainly word of mouth?
It's very different, and even changed radically in the first part of this year. Word of mouth is the strongest referral, meaning if someone refers me, individually, I have a very high probability of not only getting a good client, but, working with that client for a long time. But there's also other categories that have come into focus, SEO and discover, people just filling in the contact form on my website, meaning just people who find me because I've done a lot of blogging and I have a pretty big footprint out there in the internet. I used to do a lot more cold emails and email campaigns, which meant basically building lead lists, using researchers and trying to understand what markets I liked or could serve well, and building lists of those companies, and just sometimes in the hundreds and sometimes in the dozens, mass emailing people and creating drip campaigns and things like that. And that worked for a while. I got a number of clients who didn't know me from anything, but I wrote a good email series, and they would email back and say, this is a good email series. You have a good point here. Let's talk. And
Nice.
That would work. It doesn't work so much now. I've had to change it quite a bit because people are getting email fatigue, and there are new spam regulations and worthy, useful, good spam regulations coming into effect that make it harder to just feel good about blasting people you don't know, and a little harder to find people's emails, although it's fairly easy to find almost anyone's email. And the spam controls in people's individual accounts are better than they used to be. So it's less of a channel for me. Social media is pretty good. I have a lot of people who, 11,000 plus people who follow me on Twitter, and a lot of people on LinkedIn and Facebook. People do come that way, but I would say this, if I were to say the strongest one now is referrals. And public speaking still, I will do, when I do a series of courses that are publicly available, tuned to a real pain point that a group has, say startup founders, I tend to, people call me up or people come find me, or people book a consulting hour, and sometimes those people become clients.
It's interesting you bring up public speaking. It's not something, at least I hear about really much anymore, as being like a sales lead generator. everyone's like really going online and that's where they live. So it's interesting how you've leveraged that to really make you a winner in that department.
Well, it goes together. Yes, the answer to that is yes. But it goes together. You have to have discoverability online, which used to be called SEO, which I look at as what kind of narrative are you putting out there? So when people are searching for podcast producers, will they find you? Or when people are searching for business podcasts, will they find you? That's step one. You have to have that. Either they're going to do that on the first pass, or they're going to discover you and then go hunting for you. And if they find nothing, it ends there. If they look for Red Cup Agency and they find nothing, no one's going to hire me. So it is about populating things online. But after doing this a while, I found that I almost never close a deal unless I talk to the person on the phone or meet them. It's very rare to close even a medium-sized deal just through an email exchange. There has to be some kind of contact that goes past that.
Oh, for sure. There's no doubt about it. It's funny. We live now in a texting email world. So maybe that's not as abundant as it should be in terms of that kind of approach. But hey, I think that's the way to go too. It builds rapport, builds trust. But I don't think enough people do that. I think a lot of people, you know what, they're too busy. It's easier to fire off an email to Lee than just to shake his hand in person.
Of course, it's hard to go meet people, but it's about the quality of the contact. I'm very much into lead funnels and tracking things with Kanban style boards, and I use a CRM and all that, And I note that I could have anywhere from 1 to 6 email exchanges with a prospective client who doesn't know me at all. And if after there's 6 exchanges, nothing happens, probably nothing's going to happen. If they open the first email or the second email 4 times or 5 times, something's going to happen. It shows me that they're interested. But it doesn't ever make it to the next step until we talk on the phone or do a Skype or some higher level than just blipping emails or texts back and forth. In fact, I usually sniff them out. If they're just blipping texts or emails back and forth, I know their interest isn't in being a client. Their interest is in data gathering about me and price shopping and things like that.
I think they call that tire kicking.
Yeah, but they never buy the car.
For sure.
Yeah.
And now, Lee, obviously you have a lot of experience around marketing and branding. Now, from what you've seen, what are some of the mistakes entrepreneurs and companies are making with their marketing and branding?
I think the biggest mistake is to try to appeal to everyone. It isn't much fun. You discover that fairly fast. When you try to appeal to everyone, you're throwing yourself in the pool with a lot of other players. And you open yourself up to become a commodity, which means people start price shopping. Pretty much in the agency business, when people start price shopping, you're dead. Because they'll always find someone who says they can do it cheaper. That's it. And then you lose that job. And that's not much fun. It's not much fun to put a lot of effort into winning the client and then about halfway through the effort realizing, they're price shopping. They're just giving my proposal to someone else and they're going to find a cut rate person to do it. They may not be happy with that person or not. I've had a few instances where they go with the cheaper guy and then a couple months later they come back and say, they really screwed it up. Can you fix it? And, occasionally I fixed it. But for me, that's the mistake. Now, the fix is narrow casting, finding a niche that only you can do, something that speaks to your story as a founder or a company. Clients have to recognize you as someone unique that's been doing this for a little while. And it's really up to you. It's hard, but it's really up to you as a company or individual to deliver some kind of a storyline that's compelling and recognizable. If it's ThunderCats, fine, it's ThunderCats. If it's Media Guy, fine. All of that stuff is really important. And the other thing that I've seen really important is developing a community of early adopters. When I started, I was doing these speaking gigs at chambers of commerce. So that's local businesses, face-to-face, and people who are willing to take a chance on the internet. Well, that sounds a little old-fashioned now, but that's an early adopter. Sometimes the communities that are early adopters or the communities that connect are surprising. Like there's a coffee company I worked with, I learned that they needed to advertise to bicyclists because cyclists drink coffee. Sometimes the cohort is going to surprise you, but finding the smallest reasonable group of people who would be interested is a good step. Startups, for example, startup founders are in a learn, iterate cycle and willing to try new things. That's why they're good for me, because they're willing to try something new. And I need people, since I'm co-creating this stuff with the clients, I need people who are willing to try new things.
Is another good strategy, like say if you have your own podcast.
Yeah.
And that it's free content and it's about your brand, and it may not be an over-the-top, hit me on the head like pitch fest, but it's like free, useful content for somebody who's interested in your topic that's similar to your company. Maybe that's the way in.
Yeah.
As an adopter, yeah.
Yeah. Another thing I've done in the past is I made a list of my aspirational clients, the clients I really wanted, and I reached out to them to book them all on my podcast.
Beautiful.
And, at least you get to talk to them, and you get a one-on-one with the boss. That's pretty hard to get. That's a really good thing.
Right. I hate to say it. It's a way to appeal to their ego, to make them feel special, and they remember you. If the interview's decent enough, they'll be like, yeah, Lee Schneider, I had a great chat with that guy.
Yeah.
You develop more. Yeah.
Yeah. It's also easier for many people just to have a conversation, especially if you give them questions in advance and they have a chance to prepare a little bit. I've tried a consulting business last year where I said, I will help you write a great article. I will help you write a great blog. It totally flopped. I had one guy and he washed out of the program, and I had one other inquiry. The problem with it was that writing is hard, and people don't want to jump into it if they're not comfortable with it or don't know a lot about it or love it. But talking, we're all talking, and podcasting is fun. You get a much easier entry for people willing to come on a podcast than to do other things.
In my opinion, it's one of the most underrated networking tools out there. Yes, podcasts do take work. Like I'm about to ask you, how much work do you put into your podcast? You have a couple.
Yeah.
They do take work. So, but they're still effective though in terms of networking.
Yeah. Well, the trick with the post-production, first of all, you have to, record in a quiet room and use Skype, or I use an app called Ringer, Ringr, or Zencaster. These are good ways to get clean audio recordings that are easy to edit. But sometimes I tell myself to stop editing because I like to do the final pass on a number of the podcasts myself. The simplest one is a Q&A. One person talks, the other person talks. You get them in the studio together, you get them on the phone or on Skype. That's pretty easy. The hardest ones, and I've done all levels of these, is where you go on location and you record out in the world, or you put in music and you put in effects and you put in, you got 17 tracks going, or you have sound designers on them and all kinds of amazing stuff, which can, a 30-minute podcast, you could put 10 hours into that or 15 hours easily. But you can also, in a 30-minute podcast, have that done in 45 minutes if you wanted to. Depends on the level of production that it demands.
So you don't outsource your post-prod?
No, I do it.
Wow.
I have two really great editors who help me. Sometimes they do a first pass and I'll add other layers. And I have composers who have created tracks. And I use, there's a transcription service called Descript, like the letter D, dog script, which is an AI transcription service. And you send them, you just drag and drop the audio file, and it does a decent transcription job in about 2 minutes, maybe. Whoa. It's AI. I also use a human one called SpeechPad, which is $1 a minute. It's much more expensive. Descript is about 15 cents a minute. There's another one, I think it's called Trint, T-R-I-N-T, which is about 15 cents a minute. You have to make corrections on them, but the value of transcription is a value added. You can post that along with the podcast. It's searchable. It helps your SEO, helps discoverability. And it can help with editing, because instead of just diving into this long ramble, I can take a look at a transcript and highlight sections that are time-coded and then go back and pull out the ones that I like. Or, sometimes if I ask the questions out of order, I can reorder them. So I'm used to the production model where, we're a production house, so we do it.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, because typically, I outsource the post-prod because it takes a lot of time.
It does.
But if you can hang in there, that's great.
Yeah.
So tell the listeners what your podcasts are about and what they are.
Sure. We just finished one about EdTech called EdTech Now. It's for teachers. It's conversations between teachers and administrators. Season 1 was mostly about tips for teachers in the tech world, like how to be a Google teacher. And Season 2 was about digital literacy, how to recognize fake news and how to help your students, because it's for teachers, deal with this whole crazy digital world of information. We just finished a podcast for Brand Boom, which was a fashion podcast, these kind of fun, techie conversations about fashion and branding. I've done 10 episodes of a podcast about food and the kind of what's next in food and the tech of food. And I've put that one on hold. It's produced and it's up there at futurefood.fm. And that's me as the host, but we're retooling that podcast to become a video podcast and add some other players like co-hosts and people like that. That'll probably be relaunching in the fall. And then the next podcast I'm starting in a couple of months is about parenting, because I'm a parent of 3 and I'm writing a book about parenting. And I thought it would be a good way, both for marketing and for network building, but just to fully explore the ideas, to do 10 or 20 audio Q&A style, simplest style interviews with parenting experts and parents and writers. The beauty of these podcasts is you can just sort of start them up. I can walk to 3 studios where my office is. I can record in my office. People can record in a pretty quiet room. It's pretty easy to do. I have all the equipment and I have all the gear, so I'm ready to go anytime I want to, which is fun. I like that about it.
That's great. It's great to have that kind of flexibility and have that kind of equipment at your disposal. Mm-hmm. You're fortunate. Awesome. Now, Lee, where can people see those podcasts or check them out, listen to them? Where can they find out more about Red Cup?
Sure. Red Cup Agency is redcupagency.com. And if you go to redcupagency.com/podcast, there's a bunch of the podcast links. I have an individual consulting program, just an hourly program for just to grab an hour with me or do a month to further marketing plans and things like that. That's called redcup.us. So the main agency is redcupagency.com and the consulting is redcup.us. The other podcast you'll find, the one has 10 episodes up right now and is being retooled, is called Future of Food, and that's futurefood.fm. But all of those links you'll find on the Red Cup Agency site if you go there.
Lee, that's fantastic. And I got to tell you, it's been great chatting with you. Chatting with a man who once wrote ThunderCats, I got to tell you, that's a bit trippy for me. It's pretty great. But what a career. You've had such a great career to this point, such a varied, diverse, going from hippie kid to journalism to entrepreneur. It's been quite the ride.
It has been a crazy ride. Sometimes I wonder, why did I do all those things? And sometimes the reason was, well, there's another kid on the way and I need a couple of bucks. Honestly. But finding focus has been a real interesting challenge with so much information and so much tech at our disposal and the possibility of doing anything. You could go on Vimeo and start a video channel today. Boom. You got a network. So finding focus is a real challenge now, I think, for me and for everyone.
For sure. No doubt. Lee, this has been great. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
All right, everybody. Thank you for checking out this episode. Thanks again. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to the Stand Out Now podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes and rate and review it as well. You can find out more about our program at thestandoutnowpodcast.com. Thanks again and enjoy your week.